Horizon Chess, Warship, and this is all types of warships explained by John, not what you think. Okay? Yeah, I've been watching these videos about equipments and things, and I've watched some videos from Federal Nutrition about battleships, basically, right? Iowa class ship, this and that, warships, right? Destroyers and things, I don't know. But there are many classifications of ships, right? Now, I remember playing Assassin's Creed Black Flag, and back then, all the types of it, I knew it because of the game, like Schumers, Briggs, Frigates, Man of War. This is like getting bigger and bigger, right? So Man of War was the biggest one, if I remember correctly. So in the modern world, I don't know what replaced what, or it's just like completely different things. I don't know. But there are destroyers, right? There are warships and things. Yeah, I know there's a game about World of Warships or whatever that basically has all this element to it, which I have to play. I don't know why I forgot that game, but somebody started like, wait a minute, this is the game played. So yeah, makes sense. So let's watch it. Remember, if you like my reaction, don't forget to subscribe. That way you can help the channel by helping the algorithm, and I'll know what type of videos to react to more. Comment down if you want to do any specific reaction. If you haven't seen my other videos that I did about things like this military related, which is like kind of recent, past a month or so, check out the link in the description. There you'll find it with the latest video, sort by latest. Yeah, and yeah, I have Instagram now. Follow me if you want. It's in the link in the description. And yeah, let's do it.
4.5 acres of sovereign and mobile American territory. That's how the US Navy describes their Nimitz-class carrier. Most people know what an aircraft carrier or a submarine is, but there are 7 categories of modern warship, which consists of aircraft carriers, cruisers, destroyers, frigates, corvettes, amphibious assault ships.
Wait a minute, I know what an oil tanker is, if I remember correctly, from World Wars at least, and it was like one of the largest fucking ship of all time. I don't know if it was beaten by anything, but is there some warship that is like at that size?
And submarines.
What about battleships?
Oh well, a battleship was a large armored warship with large caliber guns. They were the most powerful type of warship during the late 19th and early 20th century. But as newer types of warships started traveling the blue waters, battleships faded away, with the last one being decommissioned at the end of the Cold War.
And how about the other?
No more audience questions during the video. That's what the comments section is for. So once your voyage through this video is over, you'd know why destroyers are called as such, even though all warships have the power to destroy. And you would finally know what differentiates these classes of ships from one another. Or will you? The first aircraft carriers became operational in the early 1920s, storing, launching, recovering, and servicing aircraft at sea. Enabling a nation with airborne operations.
What the fuck was that, man? That shit. That shit. Okay, in today's world, that counts as a crash. That was just like everybody just ran. Oh my god, he's going to sea. What the fuck was that?
Far away from home and close to the enemy is very advantageous for obvious reasons. A single supercarrier holds enough firepower to rival the entire air forces of some nations. A carrier air wing is able to perform over 150 strike missions at once, hitting over 700 targets a day. But they can also protect friendly forces, conduct electronic warfare, assist in special operations, and carry out search and rescue missions. Supercarriers can accommodate 4,000 to 5,000 personnel, including the ship's company, air wing, and other support staff. Even though aircraft carriers do have surface-to-air missiles, guns, and other armament, they usually do not travel alone. Instead, they travel with a fleet composed of other classes of military ships called the Carrier Strike Group, which is typically made up of an aircraft carrier, at least 1 cruiser and 2 destroyers or frigates, and a carrier air wing of 65 to 70 aircraft.
Yeah, look, I'm not gonna lie. A fleet, it might as well be its army of its own, right? One super carrier having that kind of thousands of people, not to mention all these different type of ship, having under one command, I'm guessing admiral or something, right? Basically, doing business and that's a colony, if anything. That's like a group. That's a military itself, like small military right there. It's just insane.
Carrier strike group could also on occasion include submarines, logistic ships, and a supply ship. An aircraft carrier often acts as the command platform for large battle groups or multinational task forces. Aircraft carriers traditionally ran on diesel fuel, but some of the newer aircraft carriers are nuclear powered. In colonial times, a cruiser would have been cruising the world, showing off their flag and representing the overwhelming force that could be brought to bear far from home. The name has stayed, but the role is not exactly just cruising around anymore. During the period between the end of the First World War in 1918 and the beginning of the Second World War in 1939, also known as the interwar period, cruisers were limited by treaty to a maximum size of 10,000 tons. Two types were defined by treaty. The heavy cruisers carried anywhere between 8 to 10 8-inch guns, and the light cruisers carried 12 to 15 6-inch guns. But both heavy and light cruisers carried a heavy battery of secondary and anti-aircraft guns. In wartime, cruisers were to operate alone on the high seas to interdict enemy commerce, but also to protect the battle line against enemy light cruisers.
You know, I don't know, it might be stupid, but all these like rules and regulations and Geneva Convention and things, let's really think about it like a simplistic way of it, like just as a simpleton, let's just think of it. It's a group of people telling a lot of people what you shouldn't do at a certain level. You can't have this big ship, you can't have this gun, you can't have that kind of gun to kill each other with. Okay. But they're still going to kill each other. So it's okay. Rather than you can't have all that, none of you can't have gun. There's no defense if nobody has guns. Why is that so far-fetched than telling somebody that you can't have this kind of weapon to defend yourself? So, it's like either have one or none of it. It just feels weird. I don't know. Is it just me? I don't know. It just feels weird like somebody telling somebody what's the cap of killing power that you can kill each other with. But if somebody can tell somebody what to do, why can't they just tell somebody like don't have guns and just, kumbaya, hold hands, no weapons, no nothing? Why do you need a defense if there is nobody to defend against?
These were mostly heavy cruiser roles, but both types of cruisers usually had top speeds in excess of 30 knots. Today's cruisers are primarily guided missile warships, ranging in size anywhere from 7,000 to 10,000 tons. Only the world's largest navies can afford to build and operate modern cruisers, principally the United States and Russia. In today's world, the role of the cruiser depends on the navy that it's employed in. In the US Navy, cruisers are primarily an anti-air defense vessel, while in the Russian Navy, they're anti-ship platforms. Other missions include commerce raidings and shore bombardments. Even though the US Navy at some point had a number of nuclear-powered cruisers in its fleet, they were all decommissioned in the 90s since they were deemed too expensive to build and maintain. Okay, enough cruising, let's move on to destroyers. Before we talk about destroyers, we need to briefly talk about torpedoes. In 1866, an English engineer called Robert Whitehead invented the first effective self-propelled underwater torpedo, eponymously named Whitehead torpedo. At the time, battleships were heavily armored and protected against gunfire, but only above the waterline. So the invention of Whitehead torpedoes changed everything. Suddenly, there was a weapon that could be carried on a small, fast and relatively inexpensive boat called a torpedo boat that could strike a large ship underwater, bypassing all its armor protection. A torpedo had the potential to cripple and even sink a battleship with one blow. But wait, with all its armament, why wouldn't it be able?
Fuck me, it was mute. So yeah, what I was saying was that all the most of the things is most of the boat is underwater, right? Only few part of it is like sticking above the water. And superstructure, I think is it what it's called? I don't know, like what a building type size control command or whatever is on top. So air attack or boat to boat attack will basically damage that, not something below the ship. Well, mostly because you can see it. That's why torpedoes are lethal. That's why submarines were feared. Not because you can't detect them, there is that, but also because it can damage from below.
To annihilate a little torpedo boat. See, the turbine engine allowed the torpedo boats to reach speeds that challenged the large caliber but slow-firing guns on the battleships and cruisers. As a result, a new class of ships emerged to protect the main fleet from torpedo boats, and it was creatively called torpedo boat destroyers. Torpedo boat destroyers were larger than torpedo boats, but much smaller than the cruisers, and this meant that they were more maneuverable and better equipped to deal with the torpedo boats. So they started traveling the blue waters with the fleet to protect them against torpedo boats. But shortly after, the destroyers themselves were armed with torpedoes, which allowed them to torpedo bigger enemy warships beyond the range of the small coastal torpedo boats. And that was the end of it for the torpedo boats. But not for the torpedo boat destroyers, which are now just referred to as destroyers. Destroyers were protectors of the fleet, so when submarines became practical, the destroyers were equipped with depth charges, sonar and other anti-submarine weapons and became the submarine's #1 enemy. And when the aircraft became a major threat to the naval fleet, destroyers adopted anti-air missiles. So this is how destroyers became the jack of all trades among warships.
The best part is I can now flaunt my healthy
So hold up there. Destroyer became what they hated, apparently, or something. Whatever. Kind of makes sense. Destroyer's whole job was to protect the fleet. Before it was like torpedo boats. Now after torpedo boats is over, like anything else, like submarines, now like whatever airstrikes, whatever they can do, right? So basically destroyers are like the guards of the fleet. That makes sense.
Destroyers are the largest surface combatant operated by most navies, ranging in size up to 6,000 tons. Destroyers were fast ships, generally capable of speeds in excess of 30 knots in calm seas. But with the destroyers getting larger and more heavily armed, the difference between the cruisers and destroyers have greatly diminished. While a cruiser should nominally be bigger, this is not always the case. But a cruiser is generally considered to have greater facilities for command and control, at least in the US Navy, which often means cruisers have more space and spare energy to power the additional communication equipment and a command and control room to coordinate the defense of the fleet. Similar to destroyers, frigates are quite common ships in the Navy's fleet. They're quick to maneuver and their role is to escort and protect larger vehicles from air, surface, and underwater threats. Frigates are one of the smallest blue water surface combatants. In the past, they used to carry a lighter main battery than destroyers. For example, 3 3-inch or 2 5-inch guns would have been typical. These days, they may have anti-air guns and perhaps a small battery of torpedo tubes. However, they're not particularly well suited to theater air defense. Their strength is usually in their anti-submarine weapons. For example, the Royal Navy's Duke class of frigates have specialized anti-submarine warfare capabilities and are fitted with enhanced sonar equipment and torpedoes. Anti-submarine warfare frigates come with helipads and hangars that accommodate helicopters capable of identifying and attacking nuclear submarines using torpedoes and depth charges. Frigates are traditionally...
Yeah, I never thought of this. But how powerful a nuclear submarine is to defend against, like just frigates basically attacking nuclear submarines. Can it defend against that? Like how much firepower does it have? Nuclear submarines is that launches nukes, obviously, but it must have like some capability to defend it against, right? Like how powerful or even invincible it is. I don't know if it is or not. That's like I never thought of that, but yeah. First of all, like with all the stealth technology getting better, how are they not making some submarines which already below water, just like untouchable or undetected, right? How are they not finding some kind of technology like that?
slower than destroyers, although in modern times there's not a significant difference in their speed. Today's frigates often displace up to 3,000 tons and are usually capable of top speeds of 27 to 30 knots. One of the faster frigates is the Indian Navy's Shivalik class, which can travel at speeds of up to 32 knots. Some European navies, such as the Dutch, French, German, and Spanish, use the term frigate for both their destroyers and their frigates. Vessels that are smaller than
frigates were the classification for boats back then, right? With the wooden and everything. So it's basically just that. But of course, destroyers is more like a job than anything. So they would say that's the frigate as well. So it kind of makes sense in that way. But if that's the case, like, okay, they kept the term frigate, or it was a new thing, because why not call all destroyers? Why call it frigate? I'm pretty sure there are no brigs or man of war in today's world, right? I haven't heard of it. So why keep frigate?
frigates are typically identified as corvettes or missile boats, which are not big enough to have a full air defense radar, and therefore are not used to escort other vessels or defend large areas. They play more of an offense role, given that they can use their anti-ship missiles to attack and are small and maneuverable enough to avoid being hit. They're also typically not suited or capable of operating in blue waters, so they typically stay closer to the shores. A missile boat is a small craft outfitted with several anti-ship missiles. They have low cost and are somewhat an outgrowth of torpedo boats from World War II. A corvette is a smaller version of a modern frigate, but it's usually geared towards one type of mission, either surface or anti-submarine warfare. The first littoral combat ship, USS Freedom, was commissioned in 2008. Littoral combat ships are a US Navy design, meant to replace the Perry-class frigates. While the LCS class ships are smaller than the frigate class that they're
how
replacing,
compared to how
they
small
offer
it
a
is.
similar level of weaponry while requiring less than 50% of the crew. They can have a top speed that exceeds 40 knots. Littoral combat ships are smaller vessels and are well suited for littoral or close to shore operations. In other countries' navies, the closest thing to littoral combat ships will be patrol vessels or corvettes. One interesting feature of littoral
Yeah, one thing about knots I always wondered, like, why is it called knots and not something like kilometer miles? Because I'm pretty sure knots are closest to kilometer, right? Like 40 knots would be something closer to 40 kilometers or something. I don't remember. Or was it 40 miles? I don't know. Something like that. But then I realized it's knots, literal, like rope knots. That's the distance you measure. That's how we measure it, right? And they don't say it in kilometer miles because compared to what? If you're going against the current, so water that is going against you also counts as speed, because if you throw a knot in there, like rope knot, it would count as that. So in that base is a knot. If you see kilometer or miles based on like whatever tectonic plate you're on or like actual distance you're crossing, that would be different, right? It would cause all type of issues. I'm pretty sure that's the case.
combat ships was their modular design. They could be reconfigured for different roles, like anti-submarine warfare or surface warfare, by changing their weapon systems, sensors, and mission crews. These module changes were envisioned to happen within a few hours, but in practice they took a lot longer and proved to be logistically difficult. In a 2016 announcement, the US Navy abandoned the modular concept for littoral combat ships and decided to use them with a single module. Amphibious assault ships are used to help land and support ground forces on enemy territory. At a glance, they resemble aircraft carriers, but they're primarily designed for supporting helicopters. They can also carry vertical and short takeoff and landing aircraft. Most modern amphibious assault ships have a well deck, which is a hangar-like deck located at the waterline in the stern of the ship. When the well deck is flooded, landing craft like hovercraft can be launched and recovered without the need for a crane.
The kind of amphibious implies that you can also land it on the beach or something, right? Isn't that what amphibious means? Amphibious boats and things? Because pretty sure like those during the storm in Normandy, those carriers that carried people, right? You can basically, I don't know, land somewhat on a beach or something. Wasn't that the case? I don't know. Amphibious, I don't know. Yeah. Because I'm pretty sure like amphibious car thing implied they can drive and also like be a boat on the swim, both, not just one. That isn't that what amphibious mean?
Also commonly referred to as a sub, is a watercraft that's capable of independent underwater operations. Submarines typically fall into one of three propulsion categories: diesel-electric transmission, nuclear power, and air-independent propulsion. All current submarines in the US Navy are nuclear-powered, but there are a few other countries like Russia, France, the UK, China, and India which also have nuclear-powered subs in their fleet. Submarines range in size from midget submarines with a displacement of less than 150 tons to ballistic missile submarines with a displacement of up to 48,000 tons when submerged. And regardless of their size, they're all referred to as boats. There are three major types of submarines in the US Navy: attack submarines, cruise missile submarines, and ballistic missile submarines. Attack submarines use torpedoes as their main armament and have more of a multi-role mission. They're smaller in size, making them faster and more maneuverable. Cruise missile submarines are typically larger and slower boats focused on long-distance strikes using guided missiles. Ballistic missile submarines, as the name suggests, can carry and launch nuclear ballistic missiles. If you take a look at the 7 categories of warships,
Yeah, ballistic, obviously intercontinental ballistic weapons, right? Ballistic means that, right? Like when somebody talk about bullets, they talk about ballistic. That's what ballistic means, right? It goes like really high, basically. I don't know if it go outside the atmosphere or not, but then plummets down with full speed as a ballistic projectile. At that point, it's traveling so fast that it might well have an explosion, because it's like kinetic energy of that, right, is much faster than molecular energy or something. So as soon as it, basically collide, it explodes, and on top of that, it has nuke in it, which is like insane. So these are usually like those like nuclear submarines. Okay, this is also terrifying, right? Nuclear submarines are the most terrifying thing, because whenever we think of submarines, it's just terrifying. And how about the nuclear submarines? Not nuclear power, but the ones that have nuclear weapons. That's so insane.
That were just reviewed, aircraft carriers, amphibious assault ships, and submarines are quite easily distinguishable from one another, both in appearance and in the role that they play. However, the appearance and roles that cruisers, destroyers, frigates, and corvettes once had have been blurred over time. Most of them now have a mix of anti-surface, anti-submarine, and anti-aircraft weapons, and their size and displacement does not necessarily fall within the traditional class designations. It's kind of like iPhones, iPads, and iPods. They used to look different from one another and do different things, but now they all have cameras, touchscreen, and FaceTime, with the only real differentiating factor being the headphone jack on the iPod.
There you go. Yeah, I think that makes sense how they would be kind of same, because if like serves the purpose, why not have the same size? But I think the jobs would be different, right? Navy would know what the job is, but to a observer who's not like too expert at this would be like, oh, that's the same boat. That makes sense. But yeah, damn. So destroyers, frigates can be, the destroyers can also be classified as frigate, but destroyers are mostly like their attack vehicles. They protect the fleet and everything. Damn, that's good. Yeah. Alright, people, there was all types of Warship explained by the channel, not what you think. If you like my reaction, don't forget to subscribe. Follow me on Instagram if you want, and yeah, I'll see you next time.